My blood ran cold, then boiled. Sarah, my wife, lay crumpled on our pristine front lawn, her hand clutching her jaw, a blossoming bruise already visible. Standing over her, a sneer plastered on her face, was Brenda, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, her eyes blazing with a nasty triumph. Brenda had just shoved my wife, hard, all because of a perfectly manicured rose bush that Brenda insisted was 2 inches too tall. The fury that surged through me was unlike anything I had felt since my days in active duty, the kind of primal rage that makes the world narrow to a single point. Brenda, however, had no idea she had just poked a sleeping bear, a bear that once wore a seal trident. She was about to find out what happens when you assault the wife of a retired Navy SEAL. It all began so innocently, as most nightmares do. Sarah and I had moved into Willow Creek Estates just 6 months prior, drawn by the quiet streets, the well-maintained homes, and the promise of a peaceful retirement. My 20 years in the Navy had been a whirlwind of deployments, adrenaline, and constant readiness. Now, I looked forward to long afternoons tending our garden, perfecting my grilling technique, and simply enjoying uninterrupted time with Sarah, the woman who had patiently endured my long absences. We found a charming house with a sprawling backyard, perfect for our future plans of adopting a rescue dog or 2. The neighbors seemed friendly enough, waving as we unpacked boxes, offering casserole dishes and warm smiles. It felt like we had finally found our slice of heaven. The initial weeks were idyllic. Sarah, with her boundless energy and infectious laugh, quickly transformed our house into a home. She had a knack for interior design, turning bland walls into canvases of warmth and comfort. I, on the other hand, found my solace outdoors. My hands, accustomed to the cold steel of weapons, now relished the feel of rich earth as I planted flowers and meticulously shaped our hedges. Our lawn became the envy of the street, a vibrant emerald carpet that invited bare feet. We even started a small vegetable patch, envisioning fresh tomatoes and crisp lettuce for our summer salads. Life was good, simple, and exactly what we had yearned for. However, beneath the veneer of suburban tranquility, a subtle tension began to emerge, a faint discord in the harmonious hum of Willow Creek. It started with anonymous notes in our mailbox, politely, almost clinically, pointing out minor infractions. Your recycling bin was left out for an additional hour past collection time. The tint on your living room window exceeds the permitted light transmittance by 0.5%. We brushed them off as quirks of a particularly detail-oriented neighborhood, assuming everyone received them. It was a small price to pay for the otherwise perfect environment. Then came the first face-to-face encounter, a harbinger of the storm to come. Sarah had spent an entire Saturday planting a vibrant array of petunias in our front flower bed, a burst of purple and pink against the neatly trimmed shrubs. She had meticulously chosen each plant, ensuring they complemented the house's exterior. As she wiped a bead of sweat from her brow, a woman emerged from the house across the street, striding purposefully towards our yard. She was impeccably dressed, even for a casual Saturday, her blonde hair sculpted into a perfect bob. This was Brenda. "Good afternoon," Brenda stated, her voice devoid of warmth, a sharp contrast to the bright sunshine. "I'm Brenda Sterling, head of the Architectural Review Committee." She didn't offer a hand, nor did she smile. Her eyes, cool and appraising, swept over Sarah's masterpiece of petunias. "I'm afraid those petunias are not compliant with Section 3, Subsection B of the HOA bylaws, which states that all frontal flower beds must exclusively feature native flora." Sarah, always the picture of politeness, blinked in surprise. "Oh, I'm so sorry, Brenda. I wasn't aware." The nursery assured me these were quite common for this region. Brenda's lips thinned. "Ignorance of the bylaws is no excuse, Mrs. Miller. You have 48 hours to remove them and replace them with approved native species. Failure to comply will result in a fine." With that, she turned on her heel and marched back to her house, leaving Sarah standing amidst her beautiful, now non-compliant, flowers, a bewildered expression on her face. I arrived home later that evening to find Sarah looking unusually deflated. She recounted the petunia incident, and while I found it petty, I urged her to comply. "It's just flowers, honey," I reasoned, trying to inject some levity. "Let's not start a war over petunias." We spent the next day digging up the offending plants and replacing them with some rather dull, but undeniably native, ferns. It felt like a small surrender, but we believed it was for the sake of peace. Peace, however, remained elusive. The anonymous notes escalated into official-looking letters, each one more absurd than the last. A letter regarding the excessive decibel level of my lawnmower, despite it being a standard electric model. A complaint about the non-uniform hue of our mailbox, which was, to my eyes, simply weathered by the sun. Each infraction, no matter how minor, was accompanied by a threat of escalating fines. It became clear that Brenda, or someone operating under her influence, had taken a particular interest in our household. The violations became increasingly personal. We received a letter about our overly enthusiastic bird feeder, claiming it attracted unapproved wildlife. Sarah, who loved watching the cardinals and blue jays flit about, was heartbroken. Then came the incident with our outdoor holiday lights. We had put up a modest display for Christmas, simple white lights outlining our roofline and a festive wreath on the door. Nothing extravagant, just a touch of cheer. The next morning, a stern letter arrived, citing excessive illumination and a potential hazard to air traffic, which I found both ridiculous and insulting. We took them down, the joy of the holiday season slightly dimmed. It became a game of attrition, a constant low-level hum of annoyance that chipped away at our serenity. I tried to speak to Brenda directly once, approaching her as she retrieved her mail. "Brenda," I began, attempting a conciliatory tone, "it feels like there's been an unusual number of complaints directed at us lately. Is there something we can do to resolve this amicably?" She looked at me, her gaze cold and unblinking. "Mr. Miller, the bylaws are in place for the benefit of all residents. If you choose to disregard them, you will face the consequences." She offered no further explanation, no room for discussion. Her dismissive attitude made it clear, she wasn't interested in amicable solutions. Sarah, ever the optimist, tried to find humor in the absurdity. We started a Brenda bingo game, ticking off her increasingly outlandish complaints. Lawn gnome deemed a non-approved yard ornament, bingo, we'd laugh, trying to lighten the mood. But beneath the laughter, a quiet frustration simmered. This wasn't the peaceful retirement we had envisioned. This was a battleground, and we were constantly on the defensive. The most contentious issue, the one that truly set the stage for the explosion, was the rose bush. Sarah had a passion for gardening, and our backyard boasted a magnificent collection of hybrid tea roses, their petals unfurling in shades of crimson, pink, and ivory. She spent hours tending to them, pruning, fertilizing, and coaxing them to their full splendor. One particular bush, a vibrant red floribunda that grew near the edge of our property, had become her pride and joy. It was perfectly healthy, well contained, and added a splash of color to the otherwise uniform green of our street. One Tuesday morning, as Sarah was watering her beloved roses, Brenda appeared at the property line, clipboard in hand, a measuring tape dangling from her belt. Sarah, bracing herself, offered a tentative "good morning." Brenda ignored her greeting. She knelt beside the rose bush, meticulously measuring it. "This rose bush," she declared, rising to her full height, "is in violation of Section 5, subsection C, which stipulates a maximum height of 36 inches for all perimeter plantings." Sarah frowned. "But it's just a little over, Brenda. And it's so healthy." "Bylaws are bylaws, Mrs. Miller," Brenda retorted, her voice sharp. "You have 24 hours to prune it down to the regulation height. Failure to comply will result in a $100 fine per day." Sarah was distraught. She loved that rose bush. It represented her joy, her creativity, a small rebellion against the sterile uniformity that Brenda seemed to champion. I tried to reason with Brenda later that day, pointing out the absurdity of a 38-inch rose bush being a violation. She was unyielding. The rules apply to everyone, Mr. Miller. No exceptions. The next day, Sarah, with a heavy heart, went out to prune the rose bush. She had just made the first cut when Brenda materialized again, a smug look on her face. "Not good enough, Mrs. Miller," she exclaimed, striding onto our property. "You're taking too long. This needs to be done now." Sarah, her patience finally worn thin, stood up straight. "Brenda, I'm doing my best. Please, just give me a moment." "A moment?" Brenda sneered, her voice rising in pitch. "You've had more than a moment. This entire neighborhood suffers because of your blatant disregard for the rules. That's when it happened." Brenda, fueled by an inexplicable rage, lunged forward and shoved Sarah with both hands. Sarah, caught off guard, stumbled backward, tripping over a garden hose, and landed hard on the grass, her head snapping back, her hand flying to her jaw. The thud of her fall, the suddenness of the assault, echoed in the otherwise quiet morning. I had just stepped out onto the porch, drawn by the rising voices, and witnessed the entire horrifying scene unfold. My wife, my gentle, kind Sarah, assaulted on our own property, by a petty tyrant. The world tilted. All the years of training, the discipline, the self-control I had honed in the SEAL teams, threatened to unravel. Brenda stood there, breathing heavily, a wild look in her eyes, seemingly shocked by her own actions. But it was too late. My vision narrowed. The red mist descended. She had pushed my wife. That was the line. And now, she was going to face the consequences. I started walking towards her, slowly at first, each step deliberate. Brenda's eyes, which had been fixed on Sarah, now darted to me, a flicker of fear finally crossing her face. She took a step back, then another. The smugness was gone, replaced by a growing dread. She had no idea who she was dealing with. She was about to find out exactly what a retired Navy SEAL, whose wife had just been assaulted, was capable of. The game of petty HOA rules was over. The real game had just begun. Brenda's eyes, wide with sudden, genuine fear, watched me approach. Her perfectly sculpted hair seemed to sag, and her rigid posture crumpled slightly. The confident smirk that usually adorned her face had vanished, replaced by a pale, quivering uncertainty. She took another hesitant step back, her gaze darting from my enraged face to Sarah, still on the ground, then back to me, as if trying to calculate the unpredictable trajectory of a rapidly escalating situation. She had expected passive compliance, perhaps a meek apology for Sarah's supposed insolence. What she got instead was the stark, raw fury of a man who had seen too much, endured too much, and now, had watched his wife be assaulted. "Brenda," my voice was low, dangerously calm, each syllable a hammer blow. "You just put your hands on my wife." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken threats. Brenda opened her mouth, perhaps to offer a weak excuse, or to bluster her way out as she usually did, but no sound emerged. Her eyes, however, widened even further as she finally registered the transformation in my demeanor. The easygoing, slightly grizzled retiree who diligently mowed his lawn and chatted about rose bushes was gone. In his place stood a man whose very presence radiated a controlled, yet palpable, intensity. The change was so stark, so immediate, that it likely sent a shiver down her spine. I didn't raise my voice, didn't make any sudden movements, but the sheer force of my restrained anger seemed to press down on her. "Get off my property," I commanded, my voice still quiet, but with an underlying steel that brooked no argument. "Now." Brenda, for the first time since we had moved into Willow Creek, obeyed without a word. She stumbled backward, turning awkwardly, and practically ran back across the lawn to her own house, fumbling with her keys before disappearing inside. The abruptness of her retreat left an unnerving silence in her wake, broken only by Sarah's soft groan. I knelt beside Sarah, my fury immediately replaced by concern. "Honey, are you okay?" I asked, my voice softer now, my hand gently cupping her face. Sarah slowly sat up, wincing. "My jaw, it just stings." She touched her cheek lightly, her fingers brushing over the nascent bruise. Tears welled in her eyes, not from pain, but from shock and hurt. "I can't believe she did that, Alex. I can't believe it." I helped her to her feet, supporting her as we slowly made our way into the house. The incident had shaken her to her core, leaving her vulnerable and bewildered. Inside, I gently guided her to the sofa, made her comfortable, and went to get some ice for her jaw. While she rested, I called Dr. Chen, our family physician, who advised us to come in immediately for an examination. The rest of the day was a blur of medical checks and hushed conversations. Dr. Chen confirmed a minor contusion to Sarah's jaw, luckily no fractures, but the emotional bruising was far deeper. She prescribed some pain relief and recommended rest, both physical and mental. We returned home, the quiet usually comforting, now felt heavy with the lingering tension of the morning's confrontation. Sarah retreated into herself, sitting silently, staring out the window, occasionally touching her jaw. The usual sparkle in her eyes was dim. That evening, as I cooked a simple dinner, the weight of what had happened settled over me. This wasn't just a petty HOA dispute anymore, it was physical assault. My Navy SEAL training, which had taught me to assess threats and respond decisively, was now screaming at me to protect my family, but within the confines of civilian law. I knew I couldn't simply resort to the methods I had learned in combat. This was different, yet the core principle remained: protect those you love. I decided on a course of action. First, I meticulously documented everything: the date, time, and details of the assault, the visible bruise on Sarah's jaw, Dr. Chen's diagnosis, and a detailed recounting of all previous HOA violations, and Brenda's increasingly aggressive behavior. This wasn't just about justice, it was about ensuring Brenda faced real consequences for her actions. The next morning, I drove Sarah to the local police station to file a report. The officer on duty, a young woman named Officer Thompson, listened patiently as Sarah recounted the incident, her voice still trembling slightly. I added my observations, emphasizing Brenda's pattern of harassment. Officer Thompson took detailed notes, her expression serious. "This is a serious accusation, Mrs. Miller," she stated, looking at Sarah with empathy. "We'll need to investigate thoroughly. We'll start by interviewing Ms. Sterling and gathering statements from any potential witnesses." I nodded, feeling a flicker of hope. This was the first step, a formal acknowledgement of the injustice. As we left the station, Sarah looked at me, a hint of her usual resilience returning. "Thank you, Alex," she said, squeezing my hand. "I just want this to stop." Over the next few days, the police investigation proceeded. Officer Thompson informed us that Brenda had denied the assault, claiming Sarah had tripped and fabricated the story. This brazen lie only fueled my resolve. The officer also mentioned that Brenda had a history of difficult interactions with other residents, though no formal charges had ever been filed against her before. It seemed Brenda's reign of terror had been tolerated, perhaps out of fear or a desire to avoid confrontation. Meanwhile, Brenda, emboldened by her denial to the police, escalated her petty tyranny. Instead of backing down, she doubled down. The anonymous notes returned, but now they were nastier, more personal. One note, slipped into our mailbox, contained a crude drawing of a wilting rose bush, with a stick figure lying beneath it, clearly mocking Sarah's fall. Another accused us of devaluing property values with our unruly conduct. It was clear she intended to intimidate us into silence. The atmosphere in Willow Creek Estates, already tense, grew heavier. Neighbors who had previously offered cautious waves now averted their eyes, whispering behind cupped hands. Some even began to treat us differently, as if we were the problem, as if Sarah's assault was somehow our fault for provoking Brenda. We felt isolated, ostracized by the very community we had hoped to join. Then came the formal HOA letter, delivered by certified mail. It wasn't about the rose bush or the petunias. This letter was different. It stated, in cold, legalistic language, that due to repeated and unaddressed violations of community standards, including but not limited to excessive noise, property maintenance negligence, and disturbing the peace, our family was being fined a cumulative sum of $2,500, with an additional daily penalty of $100, until all issues were rectified. It was a clear act of retaliation, a blatant abuse of power, designed to bankrupt us or drive us out. The letter also threatened legal action if the fines were not paid within 30 days. Sarah stared at the letter, her face ashen. "Alex," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "what are we going to do? We can't afford this. We just wanted a quiet life." Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time, there was a flicker of something else there too, a deep, weary sadness. I felt the familiar heat rise within me, but this time, it wasn't just rage. It was a cold, calculated fury. Brenda had made a critical error. She had crossed the line from petty annoyance to financial attack, from verbal harassment to physical assault, and now, to an organized campaign of intimidation and extortion. She had forced our hand. That evening, I explained my plan to Sarah. "We're not just going to fight back, honey," I told her, my voice firm. "We're going to expose her. We're going to show this entire community what Brenda Sterling really is. And we're going to make sure she never harms anyone else here again." Sarah looked at me, her gaze steadying. "How?" she asked, a spark of her old fight returning. "We start by hitting her where it hurts her most," I replied, a grim smile forming on my lips. "Her reputation. And her control." The next day, I began making discreet inquiries, reaching out to old contacts, leveraging skills I hadn't used in years. My training taught me about reconnaissance, intelligence gathering, and strategic planning. This was a different kind of mission, but the principles remained the same. I needed to understand Brenda Sterling, her weaknesses, her vulnerabilities, and the true extent of her power within the HOA. I knew there had to be others in the community who felt her oppressive thumb, others who had been silenced by her tactics. I needed to find them. My first target was the HOA's bylaws. I requested a full copy, not just the general rules, but the complete, unabridged document, including all amendments and meeting minutes. I spent hours poring over the dense legalistic text, searching for loopholes, for inconsistencies, for any clause that Brenda might have overlooked or misused. My time in the military had taught me the importance of understanding the rules of engagement, and this was no different. The bylaws were the battlefield, and I needed to know every inch of it. As I dug deeper, I discovered something interesting, a subtle pattern in the meeting minutes. Brenda always seemed to propose the most restrictive rules, and they always passed with unanimous votes, or near unanimous. There were never any dissenting voices recorded. This struck me as odd, almost too perfect. In any group, there's bound to be some disagreement. This uniformity suggested either absolute consensus, highly unlikely, or suppression of opposition. My next step was to gently, cautiously, reach out to a few neighbors I suspected might also be targets of Brenda's overzealous enforcement. I started with Mr. Henderson, an elderly gentleman who had lived in Willow Creek for decades. He was known for his meticulously kept garden, which he poured his heart into. I had heard whispers that Brenda had recently fined him for a non-compliant mailbox, a minor detail for which he seemed surprisingly distraught. I approached him on a quiet afternoon, when he was puttering in his garden. "Mr. Henderson," I began, keeping my voice calm and friendly, I was hoping you might have a moment. My wife and I have been having some issues with the HOA lately, particularly with Brenda Sterling. Mr. Henderson straightened up, his face etched with a familiar weariness. He looked around cautiously before beckoning me closer. "Come in, Alex," he whispered. "Let's talk inside." Inside his meticulously neat home, over cups of lukewarm tea, Mr. Henderson poured out his story. It was a litany of petty fines, unreasonable demands, and constant intimidation. His mailbox, he revealed, had been a family heirloom, a gift from his late wife. Brenda had demanded he replace it with a generic, approved model, and when he refused, she had levied fines that were slowly draining his meager retirement savings. "She's a bully, Alex," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "She makes life miserable for anyone who doesn't fall in line." He also confirmed my suspicion about the unanimity of the votes. "No one dares speak up at the meetings," he explained. "Brenda controls the agenda. She always brings a stack of proxy votes, and anyone who tries to disagree, she just glares them down. People are afraid of her. They don't want to be targeted like you and I have been." This was crucial information. Brenda wasn't just relying on her position. She was using a combination of fear and manufactured consensus to maintain her power. But fear, I knew, could be a powerful motivator, especially when channeled properly. And manufactured consensus could be shattered. As I left Mr. Henderson's house, a new plan began to form in my mind, a plan far more intricate and devastating than simply filing a police report. Brenda thought she was untouchable. She believed her power was absolute. But she had gravely underestimated her opponent. She had pushed a retired Navy SEAL too far. And now, I was going to show her what it truly meant to face an organized, strategic counterattack. The battle for Willow Creek Estates was about to enter a new, far more intense phase. This was no longer just about Sarah and me, it was about every resident Brenda had intimidated, every life she had made miserable. And the next move would be ours. The ground was shifting beneath Brenda's feet, and she had no idea. Brenda's escalating tactics, particularly the outrageous fines and the calculated social isolation, had ignited a cold resolve within me. The rage had subsided, replaced by a strategic focus honed over 2 decades of military service. My time in the SEAL teams had taught me the importance of meticulous planning, intelligence gathering, and, when necessary, unconventional warfare. This wasn't a combat zone, but the principles of identifying vulnerabilities and leveraging assets remained the same. My asset, in this case, was the collective frustration of the Willow Creek residents. My conversations with Mr. Henderson had opened my eyes to the depth of Brenda's control and the widespread fear she commanded. He wasn't the only one, I knew there had to be others, quietly enduring her oppressive rule. The next few days became a careful dance of discreet inquiries and subtle probes. I wouldn't overtly recruit, but rather plant seeds of rebellion, testing the waters, looking for cracks in Brenda's seemingly impenetrable fortress of power. I started observing the neighborhood with a new intensity, a tactical assessment of the social landscape. I noticed who Brenda spoke to, who avoided her gaze, and who seemed particularly downtrodden after a visit from her. Mrs. Rodriguez, a kind woman who ran a small home-based bakery, seemed like a promising contact. Her garden, once a riot of colorful, fragrant herbs, had recently been trimmed back to an almost barren state. I remembered seeing Brenda pointing at it with an angry gesture just days before. One afternoon, as Mrs. Rodriguez was putting out her trash cans, I approached her. "Those smell wonderful, Mrs. Rodriguez," I said, gesturing towards the faint scent of cinnamon emanating from her open door. "Are you baking something special?" She smiled faintly. "Just some apple pies, Mr. Miller. For a client." Her eyes, however, held a weary sadness. "Your garden looks a little bare," I ventured, choosing my words carefully. "It used to be so full of life." Her smile faltered. The HOA, Mr. Miller. Brenda said my oregano was obstructing pedestrian pathways and my thyme was attracting unwanted insects. She made me pull it all up. Her voice was quiet, resigned. So many fines, Mr. Miller. I couldn't afford to fight it. I nodded slowly, letting her words sink in. My wife and I have been dealing with similar issues, I confessed, keeping my tone empathetic. She even pushed my wife, Mrs. Rodriguez, over a rose bush. Her eyes widened in shock. Oh, my goodness. Is Sarah all right? Her concern was genuine, a small crack in the wall of fear. She's recovering, I assured her. But we're not going to let this stand. We're considering our options, looking for a way to address Brenda's behavior, not just for us, but for everyone in the neighborhood. I paused, then added, have you ever wondered why Brenda seems to have so much power, Mrs. Rodriguez? Why no one ever challenges her at the HOA meetings? Mrs. Rodriguez hesitated, glancing around nervously. She has her ways, she murmured. Proxy votes. And a very sharp tongue. People just don't want the trouble. This confirmed Mr. Henderson's account. Brenda was using intimidation and a manufactured majority to steamroll any opposition. I thanked Mrs. Rodriguez, leaving her with a thoughtful expression. I hadn't asked her to join me, but I had subtly planted the idea that someone was willing to challenge the status quo. The seeds were being sown. My next step was to delve deeper into the HOA's financial records. The bylaws I had obtained contained provisions for residents to request financial statements. I sent a formal letter to the HOA treasurer, a meek-looking man named Bob, requesting a detailed breakdown of all income and expenditure for the past 5 years, specifically itemizing all fines collected and how that money was being utilized. It was a long shot, but I knew that unchecked power often led to unchecked finances. Bob's response was immediate and evasive. He sent a heavily redacted summary, citing privacy concerns and confidentiality agreements. This was a red flag. True transparency wasn't confidential. It was a clear attempt to obscure something. My military intelligence instincts kicked in. Where there was obfuscation, there was usually something to hide. I promptly sent a follow-up letter, citing specific sections of the bylaws that mandated full financial disclosure to residents. I also included a polite but firm warning that failure to comply would result in a formal complaint to the state's regulatory body for HOAs. This was a tactic I had learned in dealing with bureaucratic resistance: apply pressure, cite regulations, and hint at higher authority. A few days later, a thick envelope arrived. It contained a comprehensive, albeit grudgingly provided, set of financial statements. I spent hours poring over them, a calculator and a highlighter by my side. It was tedious work, but the numbers began to tell a story. There was a significant discrepancy between the fines levied and the reported income from those fines. Large sums of money were being reported as miscellaneous expenses or administrative fees, with little to no clear breakdown. There were also numerous payments to a landscaping company, Green Thumb Solutions, far exceeding what seemed reasonable for the size of the community. Bingo! Green Thumb Solutions was owned by Brenda Sterling's brother-in-law, a fact I had uncovered during my initial background checks on Brenda and her family members. This was a classic case of nepotism, and potentially, outright embezzlement. The fines collected from residents were seemingly being funneled into the pockets of Brenda's family, under the guise of legitimate expenses. This was not just about control, it was about profit. This was the leverage I needed. This information, if presented correctly, could shatter Brenda's credibility and turn the entire community against her. Armed with this damning financial evidence, I knew my next move had to be carefully orchestrated. I couldn't just drop this bombshell at the next HOA meeting. Brenda would undoubtedly deny everything, perhaps even claim I was fabricating evidence. I needed to present it in a way that was undeniable, backed by multiple sources, and delivered to the right audience. My thoughts turned to the upcoming annual HOA meeting, usually a dull, sparsely attended affair where Brenda ratified her decisions with little opposition. This year, it would be different. This would be the arena for our confrontation. But before that, I needed to rally the disillusioned residents. I decided to create a very simple, anonymous flyer. No threats, no accusations, just a few pointed questions and facts, designed to pique curiosity and awaken dormant suspicions. The flyer stated: Did you know the HOA collected over $15,000 in fines last year? Where did that money go? Are our bylaws truly being followed, or just enforced on some? It also mentioned the upcoming annual meeting and urged everyone to attend. I printed a small batch late one night and, under the cover of darkness, slipped one into every mailbox in Willow Creek. It was a risky move, but I had to light a fire. The next morning, the quiet hum of Willow Creek seemed subtly different. I noticed neighbors chatting in their driveways, holding the small white flyers. Whispers spread like wildfire. The questions I had posed were now being asked aloud, sparking discussions and uneasy glances. Brenda, however, remained blissfully unaware, still patrolling the streets with her usual air of self-importance. That afternoon, another incident occurred, one that served as a chilling reminder of Brenda's continued ruthlessness. A younger couple, the Devises, who had just moved in a month ago, were outside painting their front door a vibrant shade of teal. Sarah and I thought it looked cheerful and modern. Suddenly, Brenda appeared, clipboard in hand, her face a mask of disapproval. "Mr. and Mrs. Davis," Brenda declared, her voice echoing across the quiet street, "that color is in direct violation of Section 2, subsection D, which specifies approved exterior paint colors. You must repaint it immediately with an approved shade of beige or off-white." Mr. Davis, a burly but polite man, looked bewildered. "But we checked the architectural guidelines, ma'am. This teal was on the approved list." Brenda scoffed. "The current approved list, Mr. Davis, was updated last week at the last board meeting. This color is no longer compliant. You will cease painting immediately and rectify this by tomorrow morning, or face a $250 fine." She stood over them, her arms crossed, watching with a triumphant sneer as the vibrant teal paint dripped from Mr. Davis's brush. It was a public humiliation, a clear display of her power. I watched from my window, my blood running cold. This was precisely the kind of intimidation tactic Brenda used to keep people in line. But this time, it was happening just days before the annual meeting, just after my flyers had circulated. The timing was, ironically, perfect. It was a blatant act of aggression that would only serve to further galvanize the simmering resentment in the community. That evening, a knock came at our door. It was Mr. Davis, his face a mixture of anger and desperation. "Mr. Miller," he said, "I heard about what Brenda did to your wife. And now this. We just spent all our savings moving here. We can't afford a $250 fine, let alone repainting the entire door." He looked utterly defeated. "What are we going to do?" I looked at Sarah, who nodded almost imperceptibly. This was it. This was the moment to turn passive frustration into active resistance. This was the moment to reveal that Brenda's reign was not absolute. "Mr. Davis," I said, my voice steady, "you're not alone. There are many of us in this community who have suffered under Brenda's rule. And we're not going to take it anymore." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Have you ever wondered about where all those fines actually go? Or why the HOA meetings are always so predictable?" He frowned, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. "What do you mean?" "Come in, Mr. Davis," I invited him, gesturing towards our living room. "Let me show you something. Something that might just change everything you think you know about Brenda Sterling and this HOA." I had printed out copies of the financial discrepancies, highlighting the payments to Green Thumb Solutions. This was the turning point. This was where the underground resistance began to truly form. The extreme event had just occurred, setting the stage for Brenda's inevitable downfall. The battle for Willow Creek was about to rage, and Brenda Sterling was about to face the reckoning she so richly deserved. Mr. Davis stared at the highlighted financial statements, his brow furrowed in disbelief. The neat columns of figures, coupled with my carefully written annotations, painted a stark picture of financial impropriety. His initial anger over the teal door seemed to pale in comparison to the simmering outrage that began to bubble up as he grasped the implications. "Green Thumb Solutions," he muttered, pointing a shaking finger at the repeated entries. "That's Brenda's brother-in-law's company, isn't it? I heard something about that when we were looking at houses here, but I didn't think anything of it." "It is," I confirmed, my voice low. "And the amount of money being paid to them, especially from the fines collected, suggests more than just a little favoritism. It looks like the fines people are paying are going directly into their families' pockets, not back into the community." Mr. Davis leaned back, a mix of shock and dawning fury on his face. "So, all those fines, my door, Mr. Henderson's mailbox, Mrs. Rodriguez's herbs, it's all just a way for them to get richer?" "That's exactly what it looks like," I stated, letting the weight of the revelation sink in. "And Brenda's control over the proxy votes at the meetings ensures no one can challenge her. She stifles any opposition, then uses the unanimous votes to justify these exorbitant payments." A dangerous glint appeared in Mr. Davis's eyes. He wasn't the type to back down from a fight, I realized. He was a man who valued fairness and hard work. This blatant corruption struck at his core values. "What are we going to do about it?" he asked, his voice firming. "We expose her," I replied, a grim satisfaction in my tone. "At the annual HOA meeting. But we can't do it alone. We need more people. People who are tired of being bullied, people who have also been targeted by her." Mr. Davis nodded decisively. "My wife, Sarah, has been talking to some of the other young families. They've also had their share of run-ins with Brenda. And they're not as scared as some of the older residents." This was precisely the breakthrough I needed. The younger generation, less ingrained in the community's established dynamics, would be more willing to challenge the status quo. We spent the next hour strategizing, discussing how to approach other residents, focusing on those who had recently experienced Brenda's tyranny. We decided on a simple, direct approach: present the facts, show the evidence, and appeal to their sense of justice. We would leverage the upcoming HOA meeting as the battleground, ensuring maximum attendance and awareness. Over the next few days, Mr. Davis became an invaluable ally. He and his wife, Sarah, another Sarah, a common name in Willow Creek, quietly and effectively spread the word. They didn't engage in gossip or speculation, they simply showed people the financial documents I had prepared, along with anecdotal evidence of Brenda's overreach. The initial shock quickly turned into anger, then into a shared determination. The seemingly insurmountable wall of fear Brenda had built around herself began to crumble, brick by brick. Whispers turned into hushed conversations, then into open discussions about Brenda's antics and the truth about the fines. The small, discreet gatherings at our house began. Neighbors, initially wary, started arriving, drawn by curiosity and a deep-seated desire for change. Mr. Henderson joined, bringing with him Mrs. Rodriguez and another elderly couple, the Johnsons, who had been fined for leaving their garden hose coiled improperly. The younger families, led by Mr. and Mrs. Davis, brought their own stories of arbitrary rules and punitive fines. The living room, usually a quiet haven, became a planning room, buzzing with hushed voices and shared grievances. I led these informal meetings, applying the same principles I used in mission briefings. I presented the facts calmly, explained the legal avenues available, and outlined a clear, actionable plan for the HOA meeting. "We don't need to yell or accuse," I explained. We just need to present the truth, backed by undeniable evidence. The facts will speak for themselves. I emphasize the importance of unity and decorum. We want to dismantle her power, not create chaos. We will be respectful, but firm. We will be prepared. One evening, as we were discussing strategy, a particularly intense event unfolded. Sarah and I were walking our new rescue dog, Buddy, a gentle golden retriever mix, when we saw Brenda and her small circle of loyalists, Ms. Perkins and Mr. Dobson, two equally rigid individuals who rarely spoke but always voted with Brenda, inspecting our front lawn. As we approached, Brenda spotted us and immediately zeroed in on Buddy. "Mr. Miller," she shrieked, her voice cutting through the evening air. "Is that a dog?" "Yes, Brenda," I replied, my voice even. "This is Buddy. He's a rescue." "Rescues are not permitted in Willow Creek," she declared, her eyes narrowing. Section 6, subsection A states that all pets must be registered with the HOA and undergo a temperament test before being approved. Furthermore, only purebred dogs with verifiable lineage are permitted. My jaw tightened. This was a new level of absurdity, even for Brenda. I knew for a fact that several residents had mixed-breed dogs, some of them rescues. This was a direct, targeted attack, likely a result of the growing whispers she was undoubtedly hearing. She was trying to reassert her dominance, to remind us who was in charge. "Brenda," I said, my patience wearing thin, "there's nothing in the bylaws about purebred dogs only. And Buddy is perfectly well-behaved." "I determine what is well-behaved, Mr. Miller," she retorted, stepping closer, her face flushed with anger. "And this animal is clearly an unregistered, unapproved mutt. You have 24 hours to remove it from the premises, or face a $500 fine and legal action." Before I could respond, Sarah, her eyes blazing, stepped forward. She had been quiet since the assault, but this attack on Buddy, on our new family member, seemed to ignite her dormant fire. "Brenda," she said, her voice clear and strong, "you have no right to dictate what kind of dog we can have. And you certainly have no right to threaten us like this." Brenda scoffed. Oh, listen to the bruised little wife finally finding her voice. "Perhaps if you had minded your own business, you wouldn't have fallen over your own feet." She made a dismissive gesture with her hand, a sneer playing on her lips. That was it. The casual cruelty, the deliberate degradation. My wife, who had been through so much, was being publicly ridiculed and reviled. Buddy, sensing the tension, let out a low growl, a rumble in his chest. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm. This was not the time to react with raw emotion. This was the time to demonstrate the shift in power. "Brenda," I said, my voice cutting through the tense air, "you should be very careful what you say. And you should be even more careful about making threats you can't enforce." Brenda laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "Oh, really, Mr. Miller? And what, precisely, do you plan to do? Call your little friends from the military? This is Willow Creek, not some war zone." Her tone was mocking, dismissive. "No, Brenda," I replied, my voice chillingly calm. "I plan to show you how a community, when united, can deal with a bully." I looked pointedly at Ms. Perkins and Mr. Dobson, who suddenly seemed very interested in the manicured lawn. "You and your little clique are about to find out that your days of intimidation are over. We know about the fines. We know about green thumb solutions. And we know exactly how you manipulate the votes." Brenda's face, which had been contorted in a sneer, visibly paled. The color drained from her cheeks, and her jaw went slack. The confident air evaporated, replaced by a flicker of genuine fear. She stammered, trying to regain her composure, but the words wouldn't come. She clearly hadn't expected this level of direct accusation, especially not in front of her cronies. Ms. Perkins and Mr. Dobson exchanged uneasy glances, clearly uncomfortable with the sudden shift in dynamics. The annual meeting is in 2 days, Brenda, I continued, pressing my advantage. I suggest you prepare yourself. Because a lot of people are going to have a lot of questions for you. And this time, you won't be able to silence them. I put my hand on Sarah's back, a silent gesture of support, and we walked away, leaving Brenda standing frozen on the sidewalk, her face a mixture of shock and dawning horror. The public confrontation had been intense, a calculated risk, but it had worked. It had publicly stripped away some of Brenda's perceived authority and sent a clear message: we were no longer afraid. The seeds of rebellion had blossomed into open defiance. The extreme event had occurred, setting the stage for the next and most critical phase of our plan, the HOA annual meeting. The fight for Willow Creek was about to go public, and Brenda Sterling was about to face the collective wrath of a community she had long oppressed. The days leading up to the annual HOA meeting were a whirlwind of quiet activity. The public confrontation with Brenda over Buddy had been a risky but necessary move. It had served as a powerful catalyst, ripping away the last shreds of Brenda's perceived invincibility and solidifying the community's resolve. The fear she had carefully cultivated for years was slowly being replaced by a shared sense of indignation and a collective desire for change. Word of the financial discrepancies, fueled by Mr. Davis and his wife, spread like wildfire through Willow Creek. Neighbors who had previously been hesitant to even acknowledge Brenda's abuses now approached us, their faces alight with a mixture of anger and a tentative hope. Mrs. Rodriguez brought us a detailed account of how Brenda had threatened to report her home-based bakery to the health department over a minor landscaping issue. The Johnsons shared how Brenda had forced them to cut down a beloved oak tree that had stood on their property for decades, claiming it was obstructing the view corridor, only for a new, expensive landscape feature to appear in Brenda's own yard shortly after, funded, they now suspected, by HOA coffers. Each story, each shared grievance, became another thread woven into a growing tapestry of Brenda's misdeeds. We compiled a comprehensive file, cross-referencing dates, fines, and the corresponding miscellaneous expenses in the financial records. My military training in intelligence analysis proved invaluable. The ability to connect seemingly disparate pieces of information into a coherent, damning narrative was crucial. We built a case so airtight, so undeniable, that even Brenda, with all her bluster, would struggle to refute it. Sarah, though still recovering from the physical and emotional shock of the assault, emerged as a quiet but powerful force. She channeled her herd into action, meticulously organizing the evidence, creating clear, concise summaries of each resident's complaint. Her natural empathy made her the perfect liaison, helping fearful residents articulate their experiences and reassuring them that they would not stand alone. She even created a simple, easily understandable infographic showing the flow of fine money directly into Green Thumb Solutions, making the embezzlement undeniably clear even to those without a background in finance. The night before the meeting, our living room was packed. Over 20 residents, a significant turnout for Willow Creek's usually sparse HOA gatherings, sat in quiet determination. They were a cross-section of the community, young families, retirees, single professionals. The air hummed with a nervous anticipation. I stood before them, a copy of the HOA bylaws in one hand, the compiled evidence in the other. Tomorrow, I began, my voice steady, we don't just attend a meeting. We reclaim our community. Brenda Sterling has relied on fear and ignorance. We are going to counter her with truth and unity. I outlined the plan. Mr. Henderson would formally question the financial report. Mr. Davis would present the evidence of Brenda's brother-in-law's company. Mrs. Rodriguez would speak about the intimidation tactics she faced. Sarah would present the infographic on the flow of funds. And I would handle the legal and procedural challenges, ensuring Brenda couldn't simply gavel us into silence. We rehearsed key questions, anticipated Brenda's likely deflections, and agreed on a signal to ensure everyone spoke in turn, maintaining decorum and control. It was like planning a special operations raid, but instead of weapons, our tools were facts, solidarity, and a burning desire for justice. Remember, I stressed, looking at each face, she will try to intimidate you. She will try to discredit you. But you are not alone. We stand together. And the truth is on our side. The next evening, the community clubhouse, usually dimly lit and somewhat neglected, was abuzz with an unusual energy. Cars filled the parking lot, and the meeting room, typically half empty, was nearly full. Residents, many of whom had never attended an HOA meeting before, filled the chairs, their faces a mixture of apprehension and grim resolve. Brenda sat at the head of the long table, flanked by Ms. Perkins and Mr. Dobson. She surveyed the unusually large crowd, a faint frown creasing her brow, her customary confident smirk replaced by a wary frown. The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. The meeting began with Brenda rattling through the usual procedural announcements, her voice sharp and authoritative, but there was an uncharacteristic hesitation in her delivery. She seemed to sense the shift in the room's atmosphere, the unspoken challenge in the eyes of the gathered residents. When she finally reached the financial report item on the agenda, Mr. Henderson, with a newfound courage that made his voice surprisingly clear, raised his hand. "Madam President," he said, using the formal title that usually delighted Brenda, "I have a question regarding the expenditure report. Specifically, the miscellaneous expenses and the significant payments to Green Thumb Solutions." Brenda's eyes narrowed. "Those are standard administrative costs, Mr. Henderson," she replied dismissively, attempting to move on. "With all due respect, Madam President," Mr. Davis interjected, standing up, his hands holding a copy of the highlighted financial statements. "My wife and I have reviewed the detailed statements, and it appears that Green Thumb Solutions is owned by your brother-in-law, and the payments to them far exceed reasonable market rates for landscaping, especially considering the modest size of our community. Furthermore, the amount of fines collected seems to directly correlate with these increased payments. Could you explain this discrepancy?" A gasp rippled through the room. Brenda's face went white. She stammered, that's irrelevant. Those are proper contracts. Your accusations are baseless." "Are they?" Sarah's voice, clear and strong, cut through the rising murmurs. She stood up, holding her meticulously prepared infographic. "Here, Madam President, is a visual representation of how our fine money, paid by hard-working residents, appears to be directly subsidizing a private business owned by your family. This is not just a discrepancy, it looks like a clear conflict of interest, and potentially, embezzlement." She projected the infographic onto the wall using a small projector I had brought, the stark numbers and arrows showing the flow of money. Murmurs turned into angry shouts. The room erupted into a cacophony of questions and accusations. Brenda hammered her gavel, her face scarlet, but her authority was crumbling. "Order! Order!" she shrieked, but her voice was drowned out by the rising tide of outrage. "These are malicious lies. This is an unapproved presentation." "It's the truth, Brenda," a voice from the back shouted. "We demand answers," cried another. This was the chaotic, extreme event. The carefully planned confrontation had broken Brenda's control. Her absolute power was now openly challenged, her authority stripped away in front of the very people she had so long oppressed. The sheer volume of angry residents, the undeniable evidence, and the complete lack of deference shattered her composure. She looked from one angry face to another, realizing, perhaps for the first time, that she was truly outnumbered, truly exposed. The fear in her eyes was no longer a flicker, it was a blazing inferno. This wasn't just a meeting, it was an uprising. Brenda's gavel slammed down again and again, a desperate, pathetic attempt to regain control of a room that had fully slipped from her grasp. Her face, a blotchy red, contorted in a silent scream as the angry murmurs escalated into shouts. The carefully constructed facade of authority she had worn for years had cracked, revealing the panicked, cornered bully beneath. Ms. Perkins and Mr. Dobson, her loyal cronies, sat frozen beside her, their faces pale, clearly unnerved by the sudden, collective fury of the residents. This was no longer a docile flock, it was an enraged mob, armed with undeniable facts and years of suppressed grievances. "This meeting is out of order," Brenda shrieked, her voice hoarse. "You are all in violation of decorum. I will have you all removed." "No, Brenda, you're out of order." Mr. Henderson's voice boomed, startling everyone with its newfound strength. "You've been robbing us blind. You've abused your power and intimidated good people for years." The raw honesty in his voice ignited another wave of shouts. People stood up, pointing fingers, their voices a unified chorus of accusation. "Where's our money, Brenda? What about the dog rule, you liar? You assaulted Sarah." The last accusation, shouted by Mrs. Rodriguez, sent a hush through the room, allowing the full weight of Brenda's actions to resonate. Brenda's eyes darted wildly, searching for an escape, but the room was packed. There was nowhere to hide. Her usual tactics, the icy stare, the dismissive wave, the threat of fines, were useless against this tide of collective anger. She was truly trapped. Suddenly, the doors at the back of the clubhouse swung open. Two uniformed police officers, Officer Thompson among them, entered the room. A collective gasp, then a new wave of whispers, swept through the crowd. Brenda's eyes widened further, her face a mask of terror. This was not part of her plan. This was not something she could control with bylaws and proxy votes. Officer Thompson, her gaze sweeping over the tense room, walked directly to the head table. She held up a hand, and the volume in the room slowly subsided. "Good evening, everyone," she said, her voice calm and authoritative. "We received a tip about potential disturbances here tonight. We also have an active investigation regarding an assault report filed by Mrs. Sarah Miller against Ms. Brenda Sterling." Brenda let out a small, choked sound, a mixture of fear and outrage. "This is outrageous. This is a private HOA meeting. You have no right to be here." Officer Thompson fixed her with a steady gaze. "Ms. Sterling, we have probable cause to believe that a pattern of harassment and potential financial misconduct related to the HOA funds may be occurring. Given the public nature of this meeting and the number of concerned residents, we are here to observe and ensure order." She then turned her attention to the assembled residents. "If anyone here has information regarding financial irregularities or further incidents of harassment by the HOA board, particularly Ms. Sterling, we encourage you to come forward and provide a statement." And they did. One by one, then in small groups, residents approached Officer Thompson and her partner, eager to share their stories. Mr. Henderson recounted the mailbox saga, Mrs. Rodriguez detailed the herb garden threats, and the Devisas explained the ridiculous door painting fine. The collective weight of their testimonies, all corroborating Brenda's patterns of abuse, was overwhelming. I stepped forward, holding up the compiled file. "Officer," I stated, "my wife and I have been gathering evidence of significant financial discrepancies, including detailed payments from HOA funds to Green Thumb Solutions, a company owned by Ms. Sterling's brother-in-law, without proper transparency or competitive bidding. We also have dozens of sworn affidavits from residents detailing arbitrary fines and intimidation tactics." I handed her the thick binder. Officer Thompson took it, her expression turning grim as she flipped through the highlighted pages and read some of the affidavits. The sheer volume of evidence was undeniable. Brenda, seeing her carefully constructed world collapse around her, finally cracked. She lunged forward, grabbing the gavel, and tried to smash it down on the table, but her hands were trembling so violently that it slipped from her grasp, clattering loudly to the floor. "You're all lying!" she shrieked, her voice shrill with desperation. "You're all jealous. This is a conspiracy against me." She then turned her wild eyes to Sarah, who stood quietly beside me. "Especially you, Sarah Miller. You and your lying husband. You tripped. You're making it all up because you hate the rules." It was a final, desperate lashing out, a pathetic attempt to deflect and accuse. But the power had shifted. The police were there, the evidence was overwhelming, and the community was united against her. Officer Thompson, after conferring briefly with her partner, approached Brenda again. "Ms. Sterling," she said, her voice firm, "we have multiple corroborated statements and substantial evidence of financial impropriety. Based on the allegations of assault and the growing body of evidence, you are being placed under arrest for assault and suspicion of embezzlement of HOA funds." Brenda stared at her, her mouth agape. "Arrest? You can't. I'm the head of the HOA. This is my community." "Not anymore, Ms. Sterling," Officer Thompson stated, pulling out handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of one law." As the officer read Brenda her rights, the room erupted not in cheers, but in a profound, collective sigh of relief. It was as if a heavy, oppressive weight had been lifted from the entire community. Brenda, struggling and protesting, was led out of the clubhouse by the officers, her final, indignant cries echoing down the hall. Ms. Perkins and Mr. Dobson, looking utterly bewildered and scared, quickly gathered their things and scurried out a side door, melting into the night. The room fell silent once more, but this time, it was a peaceful, almost joyful silence. Then, slowly, tentatively, applause began to ripple through the room. It started with a few claps, then grew into a thunderous ovation. People began hugging each other, tears streaming down some faces, not of sadness, but of liberation. Mr. Henderson approached me, his eyes shining. "Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Sarah. You saved us all." Sarah, tears welling in her eyes, hugged him. "We couldn't have done it without all of you," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "This was all of us." Over the next few weeks, the fallout from Brenda's arrest reshaped Willow Creek Estates. An interim HOA board was established, comprised of respected residents like Mr. Henderson, Mr. and Mrs. Davis, and Mrs. Rodriguez. They immediately initiated a full, independent audit of the HOA's finances, which quickly confirmed the embezzlement of tens of thousands of dollars through Green Thumb Solutions. Legal proceedings against Brenda Sterling began, and the community rallied, offering their statements and support to the prosecution. The strict, arbitrary rules that had choked the life out of the neighborhood were gradually reformed. The ridiculous restrictions on pet breeds were abolished, the archaic landscaping rules were relaxed, and the fines became fair, transparent, and truly for the benefit of the community. The atmosphere in Willow Creek transformed. Neighbors started talking to each other again, smiling, waving. Children played freely in yards that once felt constrained by invisible boundaries. One sunny afternoon, I sat on our porch with Sarah, watching Buddy chase a butterfly in our now flourishing backyard. Our rose bush, previously threatened with extinction, bloomed in vibrant defiance. Sarah's jaw had fully healed, but the experience had left an indelible mark, one that also seemed to harden her resolve. "It feels different now, doesn't it?" Sarah mused, leaning her head on my shoulder. "Like we can finally breathe." "It does," I agreed, wrapping an arm around her. "You know, when I joined the SEALs, I swore an oath to protect. I never thought I'd be using those skills to fight an HOA president." I chuckled softly. "But I'm glad I did. And I'm glad I had you by my side." Sarah smiled, a genuine, radiant smile. "I wouldn't have had it any other way." We showed them what a retired Navy SEAL and his very determined wife can do, didn't we? The case against Brenda Sterling moved swiftly. Facing overwhelming evidence and a united community, she eventually pleaded guilty to several charges, including assault and embezzlement. She received a significant prison sentence and was ordered to pay restitution to the HOA, a small but meaningful victory for the residents she had wronged. Willow Creek Estates finally became the peaceful, thriving community we had envisioned. It was no longer defined by fear or petty rules, but by kindness, empathy, and the quiet strength of a community that had stood up for itself. And it all started because one woman pushed a retired Navy SEAL's wife too far, forcing him to show them just what a disciplined, determined, and truly committed individual can accomplish when defending what matters most.